welcome to the anniversary with me, Yinka Bokinni, another true crime tale for your head top. And this episode, this installment of my series is being recorded during a time where I'm watching a lot of stuff. I'm reading loads, I'm listening to loads of podcasts, and that kind of includes me watching a lot of true crime documentaries. One of the ones that I've become a little bit addicted to over the last couple of days is the confession tapes, which I think is on Netflix, and I can't recommend it enough. Each episode is based on a case where a confession is coaxed out of somebody using questionable tactics, so like police aggression or lies or entrapment. And it was that show that kind of inspired the research behind the case that I'm going to be telling you about, because this week marks the anniversary of the confessions, which would see 5 potential killers sent to prison. Nathaniel Jones, who was a 61-year-old black gas station owner in America, he was loved among his Southside neighbours. He was beaten up, he was tied up, he was robbed and left for dead in his garage on November 15th, 2002. He actually died of a heart attack after being left by whoever it was that attacked him. But the question here is, did Nathaniel Cauthen and Rashawn Banner, who were convicted and are currently serving life sentences for first-degree murder, Christopher Bryant and Jamal Tolliver, who completed their sentences for second-degree murder in 2017, and Darrell Brayboy, who completed his sentence for second-degree murder in 2018, but he died in a stabbing in Salem in August of last year, did they, the 5 boys who were convicted, actually kill Mr. Jones, or were their confessions coerced and were they false? I'm going to tell you the deets. You can let me know what you think by leaving a comment in the comment bit. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. Okay, so our story isn't going to start on the day of the murder. It's actually going to begin in a police interrogation room 17 years ago this week with a girl called Jessica Black. Now, this is what she told the police in a nutshell. She said that she was with all 5 of the boys on the night that Mr. Jones was killed, and they were in her car when they discussed details of robbing somebody. She said that she waited for them at a picnic spot while the crime was taking place, and she heard screams which she assumed to be those of the victim. Jamal Tolliver, one of the boys who was eventually convicted of second-degree murder in this case, well, his mum actually called the police a few days after the murder to say that her son and his mates were usually hanging about in the area and maybe they would have seen something. Now, I can't imagine that his mum knew what she was doing with this phone call, but the police picked up the then 15-year-old at 3:30 p.m. and they assured his mum, they assured him that they would have him back home in an hour or so. And this, it would seem, is their first lie, because the police interview didn't end until midnight and Jamal didn't go home. I've read some statements from the police who interrogated him, and honestly, what they did to him, it's just so scary and so harrowing. One of the investigators admitted to telling the boys about the death penalty, even though juveniles cannot be executed. One of the officers is a guy called Stan Neves, and he made one of the boys hold his arm up, and then he pointed and said, that's the vein, that's the vein that they administered the lethal injection. And I think it's very easy to sit there in your house or whatever and think well, I would never tell the police that I did something I didn't do, so why would somebody else, Just imagine being 14 or 15 years old and being told by the police that you're going to get the lethal injection, or at least it being heavily insinuated. You'd be shitting yourself. I'm not sure that even me at this big age, of being a big grown woman, I would be able to withstand that kind of pressure. Christopher Bryant, who was another one of the boys, he was convicted of second-degree murder as well, and he said that he regrets what he said every day. He said that the police just wouldn't accept when he told them that he had nothing to do with it. The police in this case are not your best mates, When you haven't done something, when you're innocent, you don't have excuses and stories upon stories. You have one, and that's the truth. And if that isn't good enough for the police, what are you meant to do? The police told him, Christopher, about a missing wallet from the victim, Mr. Jones, and eventually he told him that he had it. He said that him and the boys got on a bus and they threw it out of the window. But then he admitted that that was actually a lie, but the police just weren't having it. Eventually he just stopped fighting and he admitted what they clearly wanted him to admit. Nathaniel Cauthen, I actually saw a YouTube video of him during his appeal, during the Innocence Project appeal that he's currently going through, so I'll pop a link to that as well. He said that he felt that he was in danger during the investigation. He was crying as an officer threatened with the lethal injection, and the officer even threatened to shoot him if he didn't talk. And he said that any kid would do that, any kid would confess. Now, you might be wondering, why am I going so in detail about the confessions? Why am I focusing on the treatment of the boys during those moments in those rooms? Well, it's kind of it in terms of evidence in this case. There was no DNA, there was no fingerprint evidence connecting any of the 5 boys to the crime scene, but all 5 were convicted based mostly on the eyewitness testimony of Jessica and the confessions, which now in 2020 are being held up to the highest scrutiny. I actually read another article, I think it was in the New York Times, that they got one of the boys to say that he threw the first punch, and then that meant that another boy eventually was like, oh yeah, well I was there, but like, you know, I didn't throw the first punch, it was that guy, and that's how it happened. This week in 2020 saw Jessica Black, who was the star witness for the prosecution, called to the stand once again, but this time it was during the Innocence Inquiry Commission, where she recanted her entire story. So you know the story that she told about driving all 5 boys, what kind of car she even got to be driving 5 boys in herself. Is it a minivan? To the park, and hearing screams and them telling her that they're going to rob someone. She broke down in court and apologised not only to the boys, now men, that she has lied about, but she also apologised to the Jones family for giving them a false resolution to their story. She said that the police told her that she would go to prison as well if she didn't cooperate with them. So there you go. I should probably tell you actually that police tactics here in the UK are a little bit different to those across the pond in the US. In the USA, the police are allowed to lie to a suspect if they believe that the deception will result in the suspect admitting to a crime, which I know sounds very, very bizarre, but them's, my friends, are the rules. So here we are, 17 years after 5 boys were convicted of 1st and 2nd degree murder. 2 of the boys, of course, they are men, they're in their 30s, are still in prison, and they're campaigning for not only their release but their exoneration till this day. There are so many questions in this case, but I try to keep these videos to under 10 minutes long, so if you want to get your knowledge on, if you want to re-up on some information or just get to know this case a little bit more, please have a read of the articles that I'm going to pop in the description, and also a watch of the YouTube video as well, just to get a proper idea of how messed up this is. And it really rings of so many infamous cases that involve false or questionable confessions. We all know about the Central Park 5, and the parallels are insane in this case of Mr. Jones's murder. They say that they weren't even in the area, and the original story that a lot of them told the police was that they were hanging out, and the first they saw was a body that had been covered because they saw the police lights and police sirens around the garage. But of course that wasn't taken as gospel by the police. There's also a case of Ryan Ferguson and Chuck Erickson, and I've actually stuck a list of some of the most famous and interesting false confessions in the description of this video as well. So if you haven't heard of Ryan Ferguson, then please get your research on, people. Red Handed, I think it was episode 48 of their podcast, covered the Ryan Ferguson story of basically his friend had a dream that they committed murder, and now they're both in jail. So listen to that, because the false confession phenomenon is just, it's so mad to me. But I think obviously for someone like me who's never been arrested and never been in trouble with the law, I just assume police are on my side. But it's been shown, it's been proven that the police are not always on your side, and a lot of the time they just want to close the case. Anyway, back to our point and to the end of this video. Where were we? Oh, yes. So while did they do it is a very important question to ask, and of course I definitely want to know your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions. I also think there's a very important question beyond that. If the boys weren't guilty, then who did kill Nathaniel Jones? This was a man who was in his 60s. He was beloved by his neighbourhood, by his community, by his family, and he was murdered in a very brutal way, and somebody out there did it. On that note, I'd like to thank you for watching, and just, yeah, let me know what you think about today being the anniversary, or this week, should I say, it's not today, being the anniversary of the confessions, which saw 5 potentially innocent boys sent to prison for a very long time for the murder of Nathaniel Jones.